Let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Dianna Cohen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plastic Pollution Coalition. Today, I'd like to welcome you to Plastic Pollution Coalition's global webinar series, which brings together our community to share the latest information, tips, and resources to help stop the growing plastic pollution crisis. Welcome today to our July webinar, and happy Plastic-Free July. Today's webinar is Plastic-Free Periods, Protecting Our Bodies and Preventing Plastic Pollution, where we will be discussing the connections between plastic pollution, menstruation, and social change. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a growing global alliance of more than 1,200 organizations, businesses, and leaders in 75 countries working to educate, connect, and advocate for a world free of plastic pollution. It's my great honor to thank NatraCare for sponsoring today's webinar. Here are a few things we'd like to share with you about NatraCare. NatraCare is the first brand in the world to offer plastic-free, natural, organic, and compostable period products. The brand was created in 1989 as a direct response to the dangers of chemicals, toxins, and plastics contained in period products. More than 30 years on, NatraCare continues to offer period products to protect women's health and the environment while campaigning to address the lack of inclusivity and transparency in the period world, as well as the taboos surrounding menstruation and incontinence. And just as an aside, when we first founded Plastic Pollution Coalition back in 2009, in 2010, NatraCare was one of the first businesses to contact us and ask to join the coalition. So welcome, NatraCare. Here are a few tips before we get started. We invite you to participate in our poll questions. We're about to share them. And of course, if you'd like to share on social during our webinar, please tag us and our presenters. You can tag us at Plastic Pollutes. Okay, we have 5 poll questions this time to help us get to know you all better, and to share with our participants your interests. You'll have approximately 20 seconds to respond to each poll question, and then we will share the results. Let's get started. Poll question number 1. Please tell us more about yourself. Feel free to select all that apply. Well, I see that the majority of us are concerned members of the public, and we really appreciate you being here, and that many of you work for organizations or NGOs. But it looks like we've covered the whole gamut: students, teachers, etc. Poll question number 2. Where are you joining us from? It looks like the majority of our audience is tuning in from North America, but we have folks here from Europe, Central America, Australia, Asia, Africa, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, and South America. So welcome, welcome. Poll question number 3. What are the things you consider when choosing menstrual products? Please select all that apply. It looks like the majority of us are mainly concerned about the environmental impact, but we're looking at everything: personal health, cost, convenience, and we're also affected by social and peer influence. Thank you. Poll question number 4. Do you know that some period products are harmful to your health? Yes, it looks like the 71% know that some period products are harmful to our health. And poll question number 5. Which period products do you use? Please select all that apply. It looks like the majority use single-use pads, but it looks like people use everything on this. So really good information. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Great. Well, thank you for sharing a bit about yourselves. And I can see that a lot of us are concerned about this subject, and I'm excited to learn more from our expert panelists. So we are so honored to be joined by these 3 today. They'll be giving presentations about their work, after which we'll have a discussion with the Q&A. I'm just going to do a quick description of each and then go into longer description and have you begin. Our 3 panelists today are Alethea Osborne. She's a technical specialist in gender and social development, and she works with MannionDaniels. Amy Ziff, founder and executive director of Nontoxic Certified and Made Safe certification, and Nadya Okamoto, co-founder of August and author of the book Period Power. Let's start with a presentation by Alethea Osborne. Alethea Osborne, as I said, is a technical specialist in gender and social development at MannionDaniels, a B Corp certified organization specialized in the management of international development funds. Alethea helped design and manage the first specialized menstrual health funding round for Amplify Change, a multi-donor sexual and reproductive health challenge fund worth over 130 million euros. One of her main responsibilities has been to provide all technical oversight and research analysis to over 30 grants in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia that work on menstrual health interventions. Increasingly, and illustrated by her facilitation of the partnership between MannionDaniels and the Menstrual Cup Coalition, all of Alethea's approaches to menstrual health include not only health, social, economic, and education elements, but also the environmental considerations of menstrual health. She has an MPhil from the University of Oxford, where she received a distinction for her thesis on menstrual health taboos in Jordan. Welcome, Alethea.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very kind introduction. And it's fantastic to be here today. So as mentioned, my name's Alethea Osborne. I'm a technical specialist in gender and social development, and I have been working in the menstrual health field now in some form or another for about 7 years. And it's incredibly gratifying to see that there's more and more of these events taking place and so many of you joining in. And I really want to focus today on why periods matter, why these conversations should be taking place, but why crucially, when we're discovering and talking more and more about the environmental impacts of periods, why menstrual cups need to be involved in that conversation. I want to start by really clarifying, I'm not trying to sell them, I'm not suggesting that they work for everyone, but I think that choice is really crucial and information is the key way to achieve that choice. So moving on to the next slide. Every day, 300 million people are on their period, and yet periods are shrouded in shame. And we know that that manifests in multiple different ways, and there are the extreme ways that grab the headlines, whether it's menstrual huts in Nepal, whether it's people being banned from cooking, preparing food, from rooms in the house, from being allowed to pray or go to the temple. But it's also the small things, right? It's the fact that you put a tampon up your sleeve when you're walking to the bathroom in the office. It's the panic that you have when you haven't got the right supply with you and you've started a day or two early and you have that kind of code in the bathroom to the random person you've just met, seeing if they can help you out. There's none of us who have any way in which there hasn't been at some point some embarrassment around this topic. I'm yet to meet someone who can't remember the time that they first started their period. And for many people that may have been somewhat amusing. It was who you went to talk to. But for many people, it was really upsetting. And in a lot of my work, it's in contexts where people have been given absolutely no educational information before they start, and therefore can really be quite blindsided and alarmed by this. And I think increasingly in my work, I've gone through these different areas, having started in academia and then more and more in policy making and more now in grant making and research and support to civil society organizations and grassroots activists, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. We're looking at this as a nexus of a way to talk about sexual and reproductive health, more holistic and mental health within that as well. We're talking about menstrual health here as a barrier to education, a barrier to economic engagement. In many contexts, it's not that much of a jump for the fact that you're missing 3 days every month of school due to your period. That doesn't take long to lead towards dropout rates, and that doesn't take long to lead towards things like early marriage and teen pregnancy. These things have a huge ripple effect. And it's also often to do with a freedom of movement. And for me, that's really linked to a sense of bodily autonomy, a sense of dignity, a control, the idea that you have a choice and that this isn't something that's going to be limiting you. There are so many barriers to gender equality and gender equity as it is. We do not need menstruation to be another one. And then I think what's really been interesting for me in the last couple of years is the fact that the environment has to be discussed in this. And as I say here, the majority of our periods are really wrapped in plastic. And there's a reason for that, because it suits corporations to have something that we sign up and we buy every month, and they want something that is going to be so-called disposable so that you have to buy something new. But the majority of the time, those products that we're being told are really not having a positive environmental aspect. And I don't think that's being discussed very often. So if we move on to the next slide, that's really what's led us in our work to more and more look at menstrual cups as a solution. And as I say, I'm not saying they work for everyone, but they need to be included in the conversation. The average user in the global north uses about 11,000 tampons or pads in a lifetime. It's a slightly odd image, but if you picture that's 2 minibuses full of waste. And these can be described as disposable, but they usually take about 500 years to biodegrade. They produce very bad toxins when they're incinerated. In many places, they're flushed down the loo or toilet for the American audience, and can cause huge blockages in sewers. And the studies in Europe have found that they're the 5th most common plastic that washes up on the beach. And that's just the disposal end. Think of the life cycle, think of the cotton, think of the pesticides, think of the transport, the packaging. There's a huge amount that's going into that. On the other side, menstrual cups last 10 years. They use very, very little water between cycles. And they're, in terms of all of the production and through to the waste, they're just a far more environmentally friendly option. And I think that has to be included in the education. But going more broadly, as I said, onto the next slide, periods are more than just the product, right? We know that. And so that's also why we have looked and thought a lot about the use of menstrual cups. As I've mentioned, there's a really clear environmental benefit. They have 1.5% of the environmental impact on average compared to a tampon or pad. They also are going to save you quite a lot of money. I mean, potentially about 5,000 euros in your lifetime if you switch. They cost, depending where you are, about $30 to $40, and they last 10 years. And that's for us who are privileged enough to be able to buy them, to have access to them. For many people, menstrual products are not something that's easily available, either because they're not in the local stores or because you don't have access or the economic autonomy to be able to choose. Someone else is deciding on the household finances, right? And there are increasing numbers of cases where there's girls who are having to exchange sexual favors in order to get hold of pads. Unpack what's going on there in terms of the risky behaviors that are happening, but the fact that the girls feel that they have to use those type of pads because that's what they're being told is the right thing. They don't want to use the rags that their mothers might have used. On top of that, we know more and more now that they really are very, very safe, and there are an increasing number of articles. There's one in the Lancet from 2019, which I'd highly recommend along with others, to show that they're really safe. They actually reduce vaginal infections. And all life comes with risks, and Amy, I'm sure, will be able to talk about this a lot more, but comparatively, they are a very safe option. But for me, always is the social benefits, is the fact that we need to think about periods as something that are day-to-day, and they don't need to be a big deal, but they certainly shouldn't be able to be something that stops you doing stuff. It is totally fine if you want to take a day off and have a bath and lie in bed with a hot water bottle, but that should be your choice. And we've seen that cup use compared to other products has not just included things like school attendance, but actually school engagement, because the fact that they last so long and you don't have to worry about changing, you don't have to worry about leaking, smelling, these things that perhaps shouldn't be a source of embarrassment, but practically in the world they are, can mean that people feel a lot more free. Also, when worn correctly, they really can't be felt. And so you are able to do any sport that you like. All of the studies that we've seen, which have ranged from Stockholm to Malawi, have been that it takes about 1 to 3 months to get used to them, but that after that time, 75 to 95% of users say that they would never want to use anything else. They really are a fantastic option. And for us, that's really our involvement, and our coordination with the Menstrual Cup Coalition is not to say that they're for everyone or that everyone should be using them. And I don't want there to be any guilt around the person on their period having to choose, but I think that this has to be part of the conversation. There has to be an option there. And the environmental factor is crucial in that. I'm aware of time, so I'll wrap up for now, but I'm very happy to take more questions. But if you go on to the next slide, I just wanted to do a little bit of signposting. The Menstrual Cup Coalition, for anyone who's thinking about using a cup and wants to understand and has a few more fears or confusions, is a really good source of information. It's got a collection of organizations who are all working on it. It has fantastic FAQs. And the Menstrual Cup Fund is something that's really trying to ensure access and education for people who menstruate, particularly in the global south, to ensure again that this choice is there, that this option is there. This is something I cannot stress enough. It is just so important that these discussions keep happening. And it is so gratifying to see how this has moved on from some of the first conferences I was taking place with when I started. But there's a long way to go, but this is fantastic. And thank you so much. I'll pause for now.
Thank you, Alethea. So interesting to me. Personally too, just in the scope of my life, thinking about the taboos associated with menstruating and how I feel like we're beginning to come through and out of those in some ways, which is really promising. So thank you. Now I'd like to introduce you to Amy Ziff. Amy Ziff is the founder and executive director of Nontoxic Certified and the Made Safe certification. Nontoxic Certified uses a comprehensive ecosystem approach to evaluate ingredients in common household products. They provide intelligence for brands transitioning to safer materials while harnessing the power of the marketplace to eliminate the use of harmful ingredients. Amy pioneered the Made Safe seal, one of the most rigorous human health and ecosystem safety standards available. The revolutionary ecosystem screening process, the Made Safe banned list, and built the organization's ingredient database. Plastic Pollution Coalition has collaborated with Made Safe over the last few years to create both the Healthy Baby Guide and the Healthy Pregnancy Guide. We developed these guides to make it easy for parents and would-be parents to learn about toxic chemicals and plastics, to find tips to reduce use of plastic, to gather ideas to avoid other common toxic chemicals, and to get safe product recommendations. So it's a great pleasure to introduce you to Amy Ziff. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Dianna. I think this is such an important topic and one we cover and talk about often at Made Safe from the perspective of what's in that fem care that I'm using, or period products, as we now really like to call them. What's inside them, and are there things that might be problematic? You know, one of the things that we always note is that when medication is delivered vaginally as opposed to orally, that medication can be as much as 10 to 80 times more potent in the body. So that tells us something, right? That tells us that chemicals that may enter vaginally through the body and into the bloodstream have a really easy access, and we should be thinking about that. And though people aren't necessarily aware of this, please go to the next slide. There are a lot of chemicals in menstrual products and period care. You know, it might look like cotton, but it isn't. There can be pesticides, and there can be residues from those pesticides, because while it may look like cotton, it might be conventional cotton versus organic. And not just that, there might be plasticizing chemicals in there. I was shocked when I was reading about a chemical called bisphenol A. You guys may be familiar with that. Bisphenols are plasticizing chemicals. They make things a little bit more, they can make things more fluid. But one of the things in the way, instead of being a hard plastic, being sort of more fluid in movement, one of the things that bisphenols can do is they can make something more absorbent. So they're inside our period products sometimes because they can absorb stuff. And it's not just those bisphenols, which are linked to endocrine disruption and certain cancers and can be linked to plastic pollution, right? But there can be coatings on some tampons to help them when they exit the body, and that could be paraffin, which is not biodegradable, or polyethylene or polyethylene glycol or other compounds. And then there can be fragrance chemicals. So there's a whole wide array of chemicals, and we'll drop a link into the chat if you're interested in this and you want to learn about that. But the point is, they're chemicals, they're not biodegradable, and they're entering our systems through something that we need to use. And so we want to know about educational information that can help us choose better options. And indeed, there are many better ones. And just a shout out to Nature Care, who makes plastic-free period products and ones that are Made Safe certified. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there are lots of chemicals that can be found in these products. And for the sake of brevity and time, we can skip BPA and phthalates are just but two. And there could be, you know, many others in period products. Next slide, please. So it's important when you are picking period care to be thoughtful if you have that opportunity to pick better period care. And I think it's really important in the context of what Alethea was talking about, because there are people who struggle just to get period care. And then there are people who are able to buy better. And obviously we're talking to a certain segment of the population who can, you know, afford to buy better and want to, but are goal is to make those the standard, so that when people anywhere in the world are reaching for period care, they don't contain dioxins and furans, they haven't been bleached and carry those chemicals, you know, they don't have pesticide residues and all of that in that. So this is from some of the work that we do at Made Safe. If you're interested, we're always educating people on how to buy safer and more sustainable products. Next slide. This was just a highlight of what Dianna was talking about, one of the guides that we came up with. This is a very rich guide filled with information, not just on period care, but obviously on healthier living when you're approaching pregnancy. And the thing that, you know, we have to talk about when we're talking about period care is what it's linked to, right? We get our period, we menstruate so that we can procreate, so that we can have that option. And so we see these as very intricately linked, and we want to not use period products that are loaded with chemicals. Particularly, you'll note on this slide something that says EDCs. Well, that stands for endocrine disrupting chemicals, and those are a particular kind of chemicals which can monkey with your body's hormonal system, and that is linked with fertility and infertility. And in the US, 1 in 8 couples struggles with fertility, and experts studying these endocrine disrupting chemicals, or what are named hormone hijacking chemicals, they can really alter your function. And doctors and MDs studying these chemicals say, indeed, that is linked to the loss that we're seeing of fertility in this country and around the world. We've lost 50% of our global fertility over the last 50 years. That is an alarming number. It's 1% every year. And there's many things going on there, but these chemicals have to do with it. And I'm passionate about not using them in our bodies, on our bodies, and around us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now let me introduce to you Nadya Okamoto. Nadya Okamoto is the co-founder of August, a lifestyle period brand working to reimagine periods to be powerful. She's also the author of the book, Period Power, a manifesto for the menstrual movement, and founder and former executive director of the nonprofit organization, Period. Outside of her work in the menstrual health space, Okamoto is also a mental health advocate and known as a Gen Z marketing expert. She recently graduated from Harvard College, class of 2021. Her debut book, Period Power, published by Simon & Schuster back in 2018, made the Kirkus Reviews list for Best Young Adult Nonfiction that year. Nadya is also the former Chief Brand Officer and current board member of Juve Consulting, a Generation Z marketing agency based in New York City, and she's been recognized on the list of Forbes 30 Under 30, Bloomberg 50 Ones to Watch, and People Magazine's Women Changing the World. Welcome, Nadya.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation and also speaking alongside people I've looked up to for a really long time. So thank you so much for having me. As Diana mentioned, I'm Nadya. I am 23. I am like a month and a half out of college, which is kind of crazy. And I'm the founder of a brand called August, which makes tampons and pads that are 100% organic cotton and fully biodegradable within 6 to 12 months. And I thought I would talk a little bit about like why I decided to switch over from the nonprofit and social advocacy side to the brand side, right? As Diana mentioned, I started my career in the menstrual space when I was 16 years old in 2014. And I really started without any concept of the environmental aspect of periods, but purely passionate about it from the element of we need to end period poverty. So I was very focused on getting period products from any place donated, whether it be from brands or collected through national drives, engaging young people around the country and in 46 other countries on gathering period products to get them to people who needed them. And a lot of my legislative advocacy focused actually on really fighting for systemic change around getting period products to be free in schools, shelters, and prisons, and taking down the tampon tax, which probably most of us know. When I started my work was in 40 states and now is in 30 states of the US. But very quickly, as a menstrual cup user myself as well at the time, I learned about the environmental impact of period care. And so one of the fastest growing programs within the nonprofit when I was there was distributing menstrual cups. So we work with most of the menstrual cup companies out there to basically collect them and distribute them. And I think it's really fascinating when we talk about this movement of sustainability, of zero waste, of more environmentally conscious programs, because I think that one of the things that is a misconception is that using a menstrual cup is like the end all be all solution for sustainable period care for a lot of people. But I think for me, something we saw every single day and what we still see today is that we actually had to distribute a lot more pads because we were working with a lot of domestic violence survivors where wearing something intravaginally was not the first choice. We were also working with a lot of communities who didn't have access to showers or clean underwear or clean, restrooms, and using a menstrual cup was actually not an option for those reasons. And I think also working in international communities where the idea of using something reusable was something that there wasn't pre-existing cultural acceptance or education around to make that an easily accessible option, right? And so for us, we did a lot of distribution of menstrual cups specifically to a demographic of people who were not homeless, but were experiencing financial instability, but still had a home where they had consistent access to a bathroom, where we were able to facilitate more of those educational programs around how to use these plastic-free products as well. And so as Diana mentioned, for the last few years, I've been on book tour. I actually have a copy of my book next to me called Period Power. I've been on book tour and working on the Gen Z marketing side and also on the company side. And I think for the last few years, I started to feel this kind of frustration every single day of feeling like, in my book, I was writing about how brands have been responsible for perpetuating a lot of the negative stigmas around periods. And I was being educated from working behind the scenes that there existed better period care out there, right? And I think that when we talk about the need to destigmatize periods and also the need to educate people about different options for more sustainable period care, social media is a huge part of that. And I feel like in the last few years, me and my co-founder started feeling like we weren't even seeing that conversation in mainstream media. So that's a huge part of what I have been focused on is how do we get people who are cultural influencers to talk about this? How do we create viral campaigns on TikTok about periods and the color of period blood, right? And a huge part of it is also making sure that we were creating conversation about making it so that it wasn't, tampons and pads or menstrual cups and not any, kind of options in between. So I left my position at the nonprofit and at my marketing agency last January, and we actually just raised our seed round for August. We are a lifestyle period brand. And I think first and foremost, we don't consider ourselves to be in femcare or feminine hygiene. We really commit to gender inclusivity and making it so that when we talk about periods, we're really in service of anyone who menstruates and really degendering the conversation around periods. And when we got into the work, I thought we were actually going to dive into menstrual cups and creating menstrual cups because I am a huge fan of them until my period got really heavy. And so a huge part of it was that we as a brand, we differentiate ourselves by saying we are community built, right? Everything that we do is built with, by, and for our community of Gen Zers. And I'm not talking about Gen Zers on social media. We actually have a separate digital home where we're in constant conversation with our community. And when we do anything from building out these viral campaigns to creating the product, we start in longer term conversations with young people saying, what are your needs around periods? What are you currently using? Why aren't you using more sustainable options? And the two biggest thing was, one, I don't trust the brands that are out there because I don't actually have a connection to them. It's not something that they're, they feel like they know the brand, and brand loyalty and brand connection is really, really meaningful for Gen Z. And a second, like I can't afford it, right? That in today's world, unfortunately, a lot of sustainable choices aren't seen as truly accessible. And so we actually chose to start with tampons and pads because over like 95% of our community was using tampons and pads, and we really wanted to meet them where they're at. And a lot of our community, we have open conversation about cups, and I love cups. I'm still a huge advocate for them. We have a lot of our community who uses our liners with cups. And so it's been a really incredible journey of having this conversation and doing a lot of work to try to bring these conversations about plastic-free periods into the mainstream. And I think where I'm really excited to connect with all of you and continue this conversation is, we have close to 100 people on this call. How do we bring this conversation to more people in sort of the mainstream kind of field of menstruators who aren't even talking about periods right now? And that's really what we're focused on. And we've kind of consistently tried to push virality a few times a week, where we're talking actively, having uncomfortable conversations around periods and democratizing access to even education around this, right? And so a huge part of what we're doing is just trying to fulfill the needs both from a period perspective to our community, but also having a free searchable database of period health questions on our website that we built with our community, work with the medical board to vet, and we just launched a media platform. We have kind of a few consistent campaigns coming up, and really focused on kind of empowering young people in this movement to reimagine period care to be powerful, more sustainable, more accessible, and more empowering. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Nadya. So look, let's get into the conversation. There have been great questions coming up in the Q&A, and we've tried to answer some of them online, but there are more beyond that. So I thought I might just start out. I'm reviewing all the questions, so thank you for submitting them. I wanted to just go back for a moment to Alethea and also to Nadya to talk about the connection between plastic pollution, menstruation, and social change. So maybe we could start with Alethea and then circle back around through each of you.
Sure, and I think it's really, as I said at the beginning, there's different versions of stigma and shame around periods all over, and some of them are small and they're pretty micro, and some of them are extreme. There was a case of a teenage girl in Kenya at the end of 2019 who killed herself after having been shamed in class by her teacher for having leaked through her skirt. So you're starting at incredibly different points here. And I totally agree, Nadya, on the need to meet people where they are in terms of the conversation. And that's obviously something that we're very aware of in the work with CUPS, and that coming in and kind of producing something that seems quite scary and quite out of context. I would say, though, people are incredibly pragmatic, there is a huge luxury in being able to even consider the kind of environmental impact of your product or to have a choice. And a lot of the time, actually, the communities that we're working in, there's a misconception about the fact that they won't want cups because it's going to seem kind of daunting or it's quite different. If you say to someone, this lasts 12 hours, you don't have to worry about needing to change. And actually, in water poor resources, they're far better than most other products because they don't need reusable pads and stuff, need more washing, and you need to hang them out to dry properly. Cups don't need that. So there are very different trends going on, though, which is really interesting because in the global north, you have people who are really getting into cups and kind of period activism because of this environmental impact, because they're being aware of the fact that they have responsibility for all of their choices. In other places, it's really far more of a practical element, and to try and break down that and try and have everyone speaking loudly about their periods, it's not really going to fly, and you've got to be contextually aware of what's going on, but at the same time they're thrilled if there can be some solution that helps them get through their days better. So it's needing to kind of pitch that in different ways, but I think it's been really interesting to me how much the environmental push has really become such a trend, particularly in the global north, and it's so gratifying to see. And certainly, having been banging on about cups for a long time and been a proud user for a long time, suddenly people who really weren't interested are saying now, like, oh, this is something that one needs to consider. And I think also considering when we are introducing period projects within other places, and that's fantastic that people are thinking about that when they're thinking about barriers to education and things, that there has to also be a concentration of, right, fine, you provide disposable pads to girls so that they can go to school in wherever it might be, say Kenya, but what is the disposal system? Like, are there bins? Are there anywhere for them to change? What happens next month when the delivery doesn't arrive? Like, how do we consider that sort of sustainable element? And so that is really coming in. And I think it's interesting that even things like the UN are now ensuring that cups are on their procurement lists and making sure that they're being offered within menstrual health programs, because if we're thinking about sustainability, cups or reusable pads have to be involved, and that environmental factor has to be involved. And so much of it, it's slow and it takes time, but it's just education and it's discussion and it's ensuring that that choice and options there. Nadya, I'm sure you've got things you'd like to add, but I'll pause there for the moment.
Yeah, no, I think kind of very similarly, it's just meeting a lot of people where they're at. I think that for the majority of people we talk to in our community, they've never heard of cups before. And so even in, a place like the US where I think we would hope that the conversation around periods would be a lot more open, I think that there is some skepticism there. And kind of to add a little bit of a different angle to it too, I think that a lot of this kind of when we zoom out to society overall, we've grown up in a world in which period care is considered something very private, right? And when you look at how a lot of these companies have marketed to menstruators over the last century, it's been a lot of marketing it as a conversation that happens behind closed doors, between like a mother and a daughter, right? And so a lot of the period choices that people are making are using whatever they use, maybe their moms use and their moms use. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is just first and foremost, open up the conversation to even talk about periods, and then to talk about like your period blood, and then to talk about like what you're going to do with your period blood, right? And so I think that that's where for us, I think, we don't identify as a period product company. We say that we're a lifestyle period brand. And a lot of that is because we find that we spend most of our time just trying to get people comfortable talking about periods so that we can address like what their actual period needs are and then go from there. And I think that that's been a huge part of our focus.
Amy, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I'm completely riveted by this. And with my background as a visual artist, I'm also thinking about a piece that was done in the 70s, actually at Fresno State University in California. It was a project called Women's House. And they took over an entire house and did art installations in every room, but the bathroom was turned into like a menstrual room that had bloody pads and tampons like literally strewn all over the entire room and in the toilet. And it was done like as a piece to make a statement at the time, but it was in the 1970s. So I do think that women have been trying to break out of keeping this behind closed doors and not having it be hush hush and not having it be, all of the code words for it, like, my uncle fell off the roof, or whatever the funny euphemisms and expressions, my aunt fell off the roof. There are all these funny old-fashioned sayings that people use that signified somebody got their period, but they were coded. So I feel like we have, as women, been trying to break out of this for a long time. But again, there are a lot of, as you all are talking about, and you are the experts, there are a lot of like things that culturally block us. So it's an ongoing challenge. Amy, did you have thoughts you wanted to add?
I think these two, really covered that question well. I lean towards what's in this stuff, and I'm more agnostic in terms of what you're reaching for, as long as I can help you reach for a product that is going to do no harm to you and to the wider ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think it does. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I can add something just to what you were saying around like having this conversation. So I first of all, I'm so excited to be connected to you, because I think that a lot of what I unexpectedly fell into from a career perspective is that we have to be really creative about the way we get people to talk about periods, right? Because, it has been conditioned into so many of us throughout history, even from like language that we use to like the religious texts that indoctrinate the world, the stigma around periods. And so a lot of what we try to do as a brand, and what I really wanted to do on the nonprofit side too, to the best of our abilities, is find creative ways to talk about periods that is kind of in your face, but in the right way, where it makes people feel welcomed into it, right? And so I think that one of the things that I've really found, even in the plastic-free conversation, is whenever we do something about sustainability and the headline is sustainability, we have less people show up than when we just make it about periods and empowerment, and we kind of put sustainability as part of that conversation. And that's kind of what I mean when we say we're not just dealing with the hurdle of talking about environmentally conscious period care, because we need to talk about period care first and talk about periods before that. And that's something we're still working on. And so a huge part of what we've kind of dealt with as a brand even is like we will not compromise on showing menstrual blood. Like we've had several TikToks go viral in the last 2 weeks showing menstrual blood, like making videos of menstrual blood, like talking about it using red liquid. And a lot of that means that we have to change our strategy to really rely on organic content and organic media, because we still live in a world in which showing period blood, unlike seeing a horror film, is considered violent and graphic content, and you cannot put ad dollars behind, nor can you really boost, and it gets taken down or shadow banned, right? And so a huge part of what we've really been having to do is find these creative ways where we can talk about periods so that we can then talk about the plastic free aspect of it, right? And I think that that's been something that I think for me as someone who cares about sustainability, I kind of have to focus on, which is like, there's so many hurdles with this stigma, as you said, even getting people to say the word period, right? That we're having to battle with, so we can reach the conversation around sustainability as well.
And I would just jump in to add that I think that it's so true, because if you can't have the conversation about using something for your period, then how are you supposed to have a conversation where you tell consumers? You have to demand transparency, and you have to know everything that's in these products, because they are fundamentally treated like medical products, which means they don't have to put on the label what's inside them. So period care, that's how period care became a big black box. And it's a person's right to know what they're using on and in their bodies, but that right will be waived unless we demand it. So, it's part of the conversation needs to be to say, do you know what you're using? Do you know what you're either inserting into your body or using next to some of the most sensitive tissue in your body? Because you might want to understand that for reasons that can impact your health meaningfully.
Right. And I think that leads me into a next group of questions that we were asked in terms of this is really going back to the petrochemical industry, but the idea is that the petrochemical industry has done this incredible job selling the idea that single-use plastics are clean and healthy, and everything should be like wrapped, triple wrapped, double wrapped, quadruply wrapped in them. And then at the same time, our culture has done this job of selling us the idea that menstruation is dirty or like kind of a health issue, and that women are unclean in some way. And so I'm wondering if any of you could talk to how we educate people, especially girls and women, to reverse these ideas so that they can understand that the chemicals in plastic and petrochemicals are polluting us and impacting our reproductive function, and that that menstruation is a natural, healthy, process that half of the people on the planet experience, and it allows us to create new people, on the planet as well. The whole system, it works so beautifully. So would any of you like to speak to that? Amy?
I mean, I'm happy to speak to some of it. Obviously, I would just say, I would urge people to think about and get very curious about the kinds of things they invite into the world around them. Your dollars are a way to, send a message to companies, and to think about what messages you're being sent. So plastic is one of the most chemically intensive processes in the way that it comes to be. So while you might mine something from the ground and it might have originally been from nature, by the time you're getting this thing into a product, it doesn't resemble that at all. And it is not natural in the way that we think of eating an apple that has fallen from a tree or is plucked from a tree, right? This has gone through massive industrial processing. And these are chemicals that are linked to endocrine disruption, as I was mentioning, your whole body, and to cancer. They don't biodegrade, and that's a big thing. If something doesn't biodegrade, that means it doesn't break down in the environment. And if, I think Alethea said it takes about 500 years was the estimate on a menstrual care item to break down. That's, 5 times, if you're lucky, your life. one period product. That, I mean, that, like, you know, my head is on fire over that, because when you think, if something doesn't break down in the environment, if it goes into your body and it sheds, meaning it comes out of the product and ends up in your body, where does it go? What's it doing? How long does it last? We don't have a lot of those answers because it's very hard to study a live human in real time absorbing chemicals. So, but we should ask these questions. And on the very, you know, flip side, your period has a purpose, and part of that purpose is actual cleansing. It's a beautiful thing. And so I don't know about how we flip the conversation, but I think it's really important to debunk these notions that a very heavily chemical process is clean and a very natural one is dirty. I just, you know, let's think about it. And I think that debunking is an important part of this. And to understand the chemicals and how their fate, if you will, how that has to do with the conversation.
So building on that question, you know, we were asked by a few different people to talk to the fact that the plastics, and if they are used in any of these kinds of menstrual products, that they potentially pose a significant danger because the plastic, the chemicals in the plastic, as you spoke about in your presentation earlier, bisphenols and phthalates are endocrine disruptors. So they're potentially estrogenic, or dosing us with micro amounts of synthetic estrogen. And I was wondering if you could talk to how that does pose a significant danger. So people were trying to better understand how plastic interferes with hormones.
Okay, so I'm not a doctor, I'm not an MD, and I'm not a scientist, but I work with a lot of them. And the concern it made safe over those chemicals, in particular, the endocrine active ones, is that it's widely known and accepted that these particular chemicals play on our hormones. And it isn't just estrogen, androgen, testosterone. It isn't just, you know, female, male. It can be any of us, and in a myriad of ways, but that they can impact the way our hormones function. They can stimulate them to increase. They can change the timing. They can curb them. So there's a lot of different things. I like to point to their capacity with epigenetic changes. We know that epigenetics means we aren't just the sum total of our DNA, but that we can impact our bodies and our well-being and our surroundings by what is we encounter. Okay, so if you encounter a hormone altering chemical, it could kind of like a stereo, like tune your stereo a little bit different. Think about dialing up the treble, dial up the bass. Well, what happens to your body if that's dialing up your estrogen at what's considered the wrong time? Your hormones start in utero prior to your being born, and your hormones will continue playing a symphony, a very, very intricate symphony throughout your life until the moment of death. So this is a constant thing, but there are specific windows of development that happen at certain times, especially in utero up to age 6, around puberty and elsewhere, and incurring endocrine disrupting chemicals, especially in those times, can alter your health and well-being and increase your risks for breast cancer or another cancer, or even impact your offspring. So they've studied and seen endocrine disrupting chemicals exposures last as many as 3 and 4 generations down the line. So that's the significance. These things are impacting our health and well-being, and we're being exposed to them you know, if we're menstruating once a month for, you know, 20, 30, 40 years of our lives, we're exposing frequently. What is that dose? I mean, I ask that back because we've got to ask these questions. We know they impact our health. We know this, and we know that they can do it in small increments. What happens in these megadoses?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. There's a great book. We did a webinar back in February with Dr. Shauna Swan and Dr. Pete Myers talking about, focused around her new book at the time, which is called Countdown, which is about the decline in fertility in men and women, as you mentioned earlier, Amy. So that's a really great wealth of information if people are looking for to better understand the intergenerational impact of the chemicals in plastic on human health and menstrual health, etc. I'm keeping track of time because we're winding down, and I have so many questions I want to ask you guys. We are trying to answer things in the Q&A section, everyone, as well. So look to some of the answers there, and we'll do our best to answer afterwards as well. I'd like to ask you all just about like students in schools and these ideas of plastic-free options and how we can bring period knowledge and menstrual options to fellow students who want to reduce their own plastic footprint, their exposure to toxic chemicals and plastics, etc. So I thought maybe we could start with Alethea and ask you as well, Nadya.
Sure, and I think it's really interesting because there are starting more and more. So Scotland's actually the first country in the world that said that it's going to offer free products to all of its students, which is fantastic. There have been attempts. Kenya said that it was going to provide free pads to all of its schoolgirls, but it hasn't really been implemented very well and certainly didn't have a sustainability aspect. I think there's a common misconception about the idea that reusable products are significantly more expensive, because the point is that obviously they're a one-off expense. So actually, they may be a bigger expense upfront, but they over time will reduce. But it's also interesting to dig into, certainly in the UK, it transpired that one of the companies that was providing the free period products, quote unquote, free period products to the schools, was also the person that's responsible for emptying the special bins for menstrual products. So therefore that company has a vested interest in ensuring that the students continue to use disposable products, because then that means the bins need to be emptied as regularly and those contracts continue. So there's a lot here to really always question and unpack who is trying to sell you what and why. And the sustainable options in schools, Scotland actually did, again, a bit like Nadya was saying, a really fantastic kind of very Gen Z focused campaign around kind of using the code words that people use and breaking that down, and did quite a lot. And there's something called Zero Waste Scotland that's done a lot around the sustainability aspect. And that's actually meant that students have started demanding reusable products. And that's obviously the key moment, right? Is when you have that change. And I would just say also generally, in terms of the idea that people aren't comfortable talking about periods, we've actually really seen the opposite. People are just desperate for it to be opened up. And if you start that conversation, when we did a funding round that was specifically focused on menstrual health, and it's not just cups of products, it was all menstrual health, advocacy, education, whatever. We were expecting about 150 applications from Sub-Saharan Africa, and we received over 900. It's the highest we've ever had. And we could give 30 grants.
Yeah. May I interrupt you for a second? I just want to give
Nadya
a chance to say something because she's got a hard stop. And then if everyone's okay, we'll go a few minutes over just to wrap things up. But excuse me for interrupting. Sorry. Nadya.
Yeah, sorry, I have to run it for actually for a conversation about this as well. So period products in school is something I really focus on actually on the policy advocacy side. I ran for office when I was 19 and did a lot of work on it from a local politics level, and then kind of branched off, and we did a lot of kind of momentum around demanding free accessible period products in high schools and middle schools. I think what's been really, really empowering is that we've seen a lot of that policy start being passed pretty consistently at a local school district level and state level as well, right? Whether you look at New York, California with AB 10, Oregon just passed one, San Diego School District just passed one, Connecticut just passed one, right? So there's actually a lot of legislation that's happening right now where you're seeing different local and state level government institutions funding these things. What's really fascinating though is in every place that that policy has been passed, the vast majority of schools who are required to have those products provided don't, because they don't actually, one, know that it is possible, or two, take the time to really kind of implement it, right? And so a lot of what we were doing on that side was actually really trying to mobilize the students to ask for it, right? And so that's a huge part of what we're doing now, doing a lot of lobbying, empowering young people with toolkits and conversations, showing up to lobby days. And I think it's been really inspiring by how much of that policy has been pushed forward by students mobilizing themselves. And I think that that's what we're going to be continuing to focus on. From an August perspective, one thing I saw from working on the nonprofit side is we saw a lot of schools who were like, okay, I want to get period products in my restrooms. Where do I go? Right. And the most affordable options there were like Uline, which was the kind of big maxi pads that have a lot of plastic in them, or something that's much more expensive. And so a huge part of our goal was, how do we actually offer examples of our product where you can buy it in an affordable way to stock a school in bulk. And for every school that we're stocking, or every workplace we're stocking, we're actually matching it and donating to an underserved school to get products in there as well, regardless of whether or not that policy is in place. And so, yeah, that's been a huge focus of ours as well.
So Nadya, thank you for joining us. If you would add or share any of those links afterwards, we'll be sure to share them with everyone who's been part of this. And I'm sorry that I know there are more questions. We're over time, so I have to wrap it up. I know that there was a specific question for everybody about the safety of silicone. I don't know if we could just paste some of the information about that in the chat to help.
I popped in a little information.
Great. Thank you very much, Amy. All right. Well, we'll say bye to Nadya. I think she's already left. And I want to thank both of you, Alethea and Amy, for being part of this conversation. Like I said, I think we could go a lot deeper. It's like completely riveting for me personally. I'm very interested in it. So I want to thank you both for being part of it and to help share your expertise and your experience with our attendees. And that said, I'd like to ask everyone to please save the date for our August webinar, which is coming up. The focus is plastic-free outdoors, honoring nature and preventing plastic pollution. And of course, we also invite you to get involved with us. Plastic Pollution Coalition will be sending out some emails with follow-up from this webinar, and the recording will be available soon. And we invite you all to connect with us on social media to learn more. Again, we'll be sending out a link to a survey, and we'd love to get your feedback on this webinar. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today. A big thank you to our sponsor, NaturCares. Thank you to our Plastic Pollution Coalition members and partners who shared this webinar with their communities and networks, including the Menstrual Cup Coalition. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in August. Thank you.